It was a quiet afternoon on the outskirts of a small Texas town. A dusty highway stretched endlessly, leading to a roadside diner known for its strong coffee and homemade pie. Inside, a few travelers sat quietly, truckers, locals, and families passing through. Among them was a calm, older man sitting in the corner booth, quietly enjoying his lunch. His name was Chuck Norris, though no one inside the diner seemed to notice. Dressed simply in jeans and a faded jacket, he looked like any other passerby stopping for a quick bite. As he sipped his coffee, the peaceful atmosphere was suddenly broken by the loud roar of motorcycle engines outside. The sound grew closer until the glass windows rattled. Moments later, the diner doors swung open, and a gang of bikers stomped in. Leather jackets, boots, tattoos, and an attitude that filled the room before their voices did. They laughed loudly, cursing, shoving each other around as they headed toward the counter. The waitress, clearly uncomfortable, forced a nervous smile and tried to take their order. The bikers ignored her politeness, tossing crude jokes and mocking the customers around them. Chuck kept to himself, quietly finishing his meal. But one of the bikers noticed him, a man sitting alone, calm, silent, unmoved by their noise. That seemed to bother him. He nudged his friend and sneered, "Look at this old guy, acting like he owns the place." The others chuckled, glancing toward Chuck's table. Chuck simply raised his eyes, gave a polite nod, and returned to his plate. He had no intention of starting trouble, but that small gesture, that calm confidence, only irritated the bikers more. They started making louder comments, trying to get his attention. The leader, a tall man with a thick beard and dark sunglasses, leaned toward Chuck's booth and said in a low, mocking tone, "Hey, Grandpa. You lost or just too scared to look up?" The room fell silent. Even the waitress froze, waiting to see what would happen next. Chuck looked up slowly, his expression steady, his voice calm. "No, son. I'm right where I need to be." What happened next made the entire diner fall silent. Have you ever seen someone pick the wrong fight? And tell me, which country and city are you watching this story from? The gang thought they were about to humiliate an old man, but they had no idea that the man standing before them was one of the most skilled martial artists on earth. The hot Texas sun burned down on the cracked asphalt outside the diner. Engines rumbled, echoing through the open highway. Dust rose around the gang's motorcycles as they circled Chuck like predators around quiet prey. The leader, a tall man with a thick beard and tattoos creeping up his neck, smirked. He took off his sunglasses and looked Chuck straight in the eyes. "You really think you can stand against us, old man?" Chuck didn't move. His hands rested loosely at his sides, calm, relaxed, but his stance was grounded, unshakable. "I'm not standing against anyone," he said quietly. "I'm standing for a little peace." The gang laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. One of them revved his bike loudly, the sound cutting through the dry air like thunder. Another tossed his cigarette on the ground near Chuck's boots, grinning. "Peace?" The leader scoffed. "You're about to lose more than your peace, cowboy." Inside the diner, faces were pressed to the window. The waitress covered her mouth, whispering, "Please don't do this." The cook muttered, "He should just leave." But the old truck driver shook his head slowly. "No, he's not the one who needs to leave." Outside, the leader took another step closer until he was almost chest to chest with Chuck. "Let's make this simple," he said, voice dripping with arrogance. "Say sorry. Right now. In front of my boys. And maybe, just maybe, we'll let you go." Chuck's gaze stayed steady. He didn't blink, didn't back down. "Son," he said calmly, "you don't ask for respect by scaring people. You earn it." The biker's grin vanished. For a long moment, the two men just stared at each other. Then the leader's jaw clenched. He slapped Chuck's hat off his head. The diner gasped. The hat landed in the dirt, and the sound of it, that small, soft sound, hit harder than a gunshot. Chuck's expression didn't change. He simply looked down at his hat for a second, then back up at the man standing over him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move an inch, but his next words carried a weight that silenced the laughter around him. "That was your last warning." The biker laughed mockingly and shoved him hard in the chest. Chuck took half a step back but didn't lose balance. "Come on, Grandpa," the biker shouted. "Show us that piece you're talking about." The gang howled with laughter, but it didn't last long. Chuck slowly bent down, picked up his hat, and brushed off the dust. Then, without looking up, he said quietly, You boys sure you're ready for this? The laughter died down. Something about his voice, and he calm, measured, too calm, unsettled even the bravest of them. Still, pride wouldn't let them stop. The leader motioned to one of his men. Go ahead, show the old man his place. The biker grinned and walked forward, cracking his knuckles dramatically. You heard the boss, he said. Let's see what you've got. Chuck stood motionless, the sun reflecting off his calm eyes. The biker threw a quick shove at Chuck's shoulder. A test, maybe a joke. Chuck didn't move. Then the biker swung again, a little harder. Chuck's hand shot up, fast as lightning. He caught the man's wrist in midair. The sound of the grip echoed like a whip crack. The biker's grin faded into confusion, then pain. Chuck released his hand and stepped back, giving him a second chance. Don't, he said softly. But the biker didn't listen. He lunged again, a mistake he would regret instantly. Chuck sidestepped, redirected the attack, and the man stumbled forward, tripping over his own feet. The gang roared in shock. The leader's expression hardened. You think that was funny? He shouted, furious now. Chuck's tone was calm as ever. No, I think it was a warning. The leader's jaw tightened. You'll regret that, old man. No, Chuck replied quietly. But you might. The gang tightened their circle, adrenaline rushing through their veins. The bystanders inside the diner could barely breathe. The waitress whispered, he's going to take them all on by himself. What the bikers didn't understand was that this man wasn't just some stranger passing through. He was a 7th-degree black belt in karate, a living legend in martial arts, known for his discipline, precision, and control. The leader spat on the ground again and stepped forward. Enough talking, he growled. Let's finish this. Chuck's hands came up slowly, not in anger but readiness. His eyes locked onto the leader's every move. The sound of the engines, the cicadas, the wind. Everything seemed to fade until only silence remained. Then the leader lunged. But before contact was made, Chuck sidestepped, his body moving with effortless control. He didn't punch, just redirected the attack and lightly tapped the man's arm away, using his own force against him. The leader stumbled, his sunglasses flying off his face. Gasps came from every direction, from his own crew, from the diner window, from everyone watching. Chuck lowered his hands again, his voice steady as ever. You still have time to walk away. The camera focuses on the leader's face. Red with anger, pride broken, ego shattered, yet still too stubborn to quit. He clenched his fists, breathing heavily. The gang grew restless, whispering among themselves. If you were in Chuck's place, would you walk away and avoid the fight? Or stand your ground like he did? Tell me in the comments. The leader had no idea that the man he was about to swing at again was the same man who trained elite soldiers, won world championships, and could end a fight before it even began. The leader roared in frustration, charging forward, and that's when everything changed. Dust rises, camera pans to the diner window, frozen faces, hands over mouths. The sound of a single thud echoes across the lot. The moment the first punch landed, the fight was over before it even began. The world seemed to hold its breath. The wind slowed. The sound of cicadas vanished. Even the engines outside fell silent as the leader of the biker gang charged forward. Chuck Norris didn't move at first. He waited, calm, still patient, like a man watching a storm he already knew how to weather. Then in a flash he turned his shoulder just enough. The biker's fist cut through empty air. Chuck's open palm redirected the punch, using the man's own weight against him. In a blur, the leader stumbled forward, and before he could recover, Chuck's elbow met his chest with a perfectly timed strike. Thud. It wasn't loud, but it was final. The leader's breath caught. His knees buckled. He hit the ground coughing, eyes wide in disbelief. Gasps erupted from the gang. One shouted, "Boss, you okay?" Another cursed and charged toward Chuck. The second biker threw a wild swing, sloppy, emotional. Chuck ducked effortlessly, swept his leg around, and tapped the man's ankle just enough to send him spinning into the dirt. The crowd watching from the diner window exploded in shock. Inside, someone whispered, That's Chuck Norris." Another replied, "No way." "The Chuck Norris?" The waitress pressed her palms against the glass, whispering, "It is him." Back outside, two more bikers circled Chuck, trying to find an opening. One lunged low, The other swung high. Chuck pivoted between them, blocking one punch and sidestepping the other. His movements were precise and were not flashy, not cruel, just efficient. Each step, each motion looked like something out of a movie. But this was real. The first biker tried again, charging with a roar. Chuck shifted his weight and, in one smooth motion, delivered a roundhouse kick that stopped an inch short of the man's face, just close enough to make him freeze in fear. Chuck's voice was calm, even kind. "I told you to walk away." The biker's hands went up immediately. He stumbled backward, nodding, his pride shattered. Now only the leader remained on the ground, groaning, trying to get up. Chuck knelt down slightly, just enough to meet his eye level. "You okay?" he asked sincerely. The leader spat to the side, coughing, and muttered, You could have broken my ribs." Chuck nodded slowly. "I could have, but that's not why I fight." He stood up again, brushing the dust from his jacket. His tone wasn't arrogant, it was teaching, firm but fair. "You see, strength isn't about hurting people. It's about knowing when not to." The gang stood frozen. The air was thick with shame and disbelief. The man they'd mocked, shoved, and insulted had just taken them apart without breaking a sweat, and without truly hurting anyone. Then, from behind the diner door, someone called out, "That's Chuck Norris. He's a black belt in karate and a real-life legend." The name hit the gang like lightning. Eyes widened, mouths fell open, the leader blinked in disbelief. "You're that Chuck Norris?" Chuck gave a small, almost amused smile. "Last time I checked." For a few seconds no one spoke. The only sound was the wind brushing against the highway. Then slowly the bikers began lowering their heads, embarrassment and realization sinking in. The leader swallowed hard, struggling to find words. "Look, man, I didn't know. We didn't." Chuck held up a hand gently to stop him. "Doesn't matter who I am. You shouldn't treat anyone that way." The leader nodded slowly, guilt replacing his earlier arrogance. The other bikers followed his lead, standing awkwardly, not sure what to do with themselves. From the diner, the old truck driver came outside and shouted, "Hey, son, you're lucky that man's got more control than you got sense." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. Even Chuck allowed himself a faint grin. The waitress stepped outside, holding a glass of water. "Sir," she said, handing it to him. "On the house." Chuck accepted it with a nod. "Thank you, ma'am." He turned back toward the bikers one last time. "You've got two choices," he said. "Keep living like this, or start showing the world the kind of respect you expect to get back." The leader lowered his eyes. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "We've been acting like fools." Chuck nodded once, not in victory but in understanding. "Then fix it," he said. "That's all that matters." He placed his hat back on his head, calm and composed, and began walking toward his truck parked near the highway. The crowd inside the diner stepped out, clapping quietly. What Chuck showed that day wasn't power. It was discipline, the strength to control power rather than abuse it. As he climbed into his truck, the bikers stood by their bikes watching in silence. The leader finally called out, "Mr. Norris, thanks for not, Chuck smiled faintly, started his engine, and said just loud enough for them to hear, "Just remember, every man's tough until he meets someone tougher inside himself." The truck rolled away, leaving behind only dust and the sound of a lesson none of them would ever forget. But what happened next would make this story explode across the internet. As the world learned what really happened that day on the Texas highway, the dust had barely settled on that quiet Texas highway when the first phone notification buzzed. Inside the diner, one of the young bystanders, and the same one who'd recorded the whole encounter, uploaded the video to social media. The caption read, "Biker gang messes with old man at diner, then realizes it's Chuck Norris." He hit post within minutes. It started to spread. By the time Chuck Norris's truck disappeared into the horizon, the clip had already crossed 50,000 views. By sunset, it hit 2 million. By midnight, it was everywhere. The video showed everything. The bikers mocking Chuck, the shove, the calm warning, and that final, graceful moment when Chuck defused the fight without hurting anyone. Comment sections exploded with disbelief and admiration. "Man, Chuck still moves like lightning. He didn't even lose his cool, and that's real strength. This is how you handle arrogance, men, with grace, not ego." Meanwhile, the bikers, once loud and fearless, were now facing the weight of their actions. The gang's leader sat on his bike in silence, scrolling through his phone. Every major news outlet was covering the story. His face, once hidden behind sunglasses and swagger, was now plastered across headlines like, "Biker confronts Chuck Norris, instantly regrets it." He sighed, rubbing his temples. His friends stood nearby, equally embarrassed. The arrogance they once wore like armor had evaporated overnight. "Man, we messed up bad," one muttered. "You think he'll forgive us?" another asked quietly. The leader exhaled deeply. "I don't know. But maybe it's time we stop being the kind of men who need forgiveness in the first place." Chuck sat on his porch, sipping coffee, the same calm expression on his face. His phone rang, an old friend calling. "Chuck, you've gone viral again," the voice chuckled. "Not surprised," Chuck replied. "Seems like the internet loves a good lesson." He wasn't proud of embarrassing anyone. He didn't brag or even post about it. But when a reporter showed up at his gate later that evening, asking for a statement, Chuck agreed. Not to talk about himself, but to send a message. Standing on his porch, hat in hand, he spoke softly but with purpose. Violence doesn't make a man strong. Control does. Power means nothing if you can't use it wisely. I hope those young men learn from this, and then I hope others do too. The clip of his message aired on national TV that night. Millions tuned in, not for the fight, but for the wisdom behind it. Across the world, people started sharing the video with captions like, "Real masculinity is calm, discipline over dominance. The world needs more men like Chuck Norris." Even the bikers themselves watched the interview. The leader lowered his head and said quietly, "He's right. We acted like fools. Time we fix that." A few days passed before anyone saw the bikers again. Then one afternoon, a familiar rumble echoed outside the same diner. The waitress peeked out the window, nervous at first, but what she saw surprised her. The gang wasn't there to cause trouble. They parked their bikes quietly, walked inside respectfully, and asked if the owner was around. "We came to apologize," the leader said softly, "for what we did last week." The waitress's eyes widened. "You're serious?" He nodded. "Mr. Norris was right. We were wrong to treat anyone that way. We've decided to change how we ride, how we act." The old truck driver who had witnessed everything that day stood from his booth and smiled. Now that's the kind of strength worth showing off. The bikers nodded, humbled. They didn't know that another diner guest was filming again, but this time, it wasn't a fight, it was redemption. The new clip went viral too. The same gang who once mocked, Chuck Norris now apologizing and helping clean up the diner's parking lot. Sometimes it takes a fall to learn how to stand tall. The bikers didn't just meet Chuck Norris that day. They met the lesson every man eventually faces. Respect is earned, not demanded. Chuck received a call from the diner owner. "You won't believe this," the man said. "Those bikers came back and made things right." Chuck smiled faintly. "That's good," he said. "It means they were listening, not just watching." He hung up, leaned back, and looked at the horizon. The sun was setting over the Texas plains, calm, golden, peaceful, he whispered to himself. Sometimes the best punch is the one you never throw. The story of the biker gang and Chuck Norris wasn't about revenge or dominance. It was about the quiet power of restraint, the reminder that real heroes don't need to prove they're strong. They show it by choosing peace. What do you think was the most powerful part of this story? The fight or the forgiveness? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories like this one. It started as a diner scuffle in a small Texas town, but within a week, it had become a global story, a lesson shared across continents. Every news channel, podcast, and social media platform was talking about it. Chuck Norris humbles biker gang without throwing a punch. Viral moment reminds the world what real strength looks like. Clips of Chuck's calm warning, his effortless defense, and his final quote, "Strength isn't about hurting people. It's about knowing when not to." Spread across YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. Celebrities reposted it. Teachers played it in classrooms. Even law enforcement and self-defense instructors used it as an example of controlled power and moral restraint. Of young cadets sat in silence as the instructor replayed the viral video on a projector. When it ended, he turned around and said, "Gentlemen, that's what discipline looks like. That's control. You can't always choose what happens, but you can always choose how you respond." At the back of the room, a familiar figure entered quietly. The cadets turned their heads in disbelief. It was Chuck Norris himself. The instructor smiled. "Mr. Norris, we were just watching your video." Chuck nodded. "Then you already know the lesson. But I'll say this, the world doesn't need more fighters. It needs more men who know when not to fight." The room fell completely silent. No dramatic music. No applause. Just deep respect. Across the world, people debated and discussed the video. Talk shows featured experts analyzing Chuck's composure under pressure. One psychologist said, "It's fascinating, he never escalated. He maintained calm dominance not through aggression, but through confidence and control." A martial arts master from Japan commented, "This is true Bushido, the way of the warrior. To conquer anger is to conquer oneself." And a youth leader from Brazil posted, "Every young man should watch this video. It's a masterclass in self-respect." The leader, once known for his temper, now organized charity rides across the state. They called it the Road of Respect, a campaign to promote kindness, discipline, and anti-bullying awareness. They even printed shirts that read, "Strong enough to be kind." Reporters asked the leader what changed him. He smiled humbly and said, "That day with Chuck, it broke something in me, my ego. I realized we were riding for power, not purpose. Now we ride for respect." When Chuck heard about it, he didn't post or boast. He simply smiled and said to a friend, "Looks like they found their strength." A journalist asked Chuck, "Did you expect the video to become a global phenomenon?" Chuck shook his head slightly, chuckling. "No, I was just trying to have lunch." The audience laughed softly. Then his tone grew serious. But maybe people needed a reminder. Respect and humility aren't signs of weakness. They're the foundation of strength. The world's loud enough already. We need more quiet examples. The interviewer leaned forward. "And what about the bikers?" Chuck smiled warmly. "They learned their lesson, and I learned something too. No matter how old you get, there's always a chance to teach and to be taught." The internet flooded with messages. Fathers teaching their sons about discipline. Martial artists sharing stories of self-controlled teachers using the video as a lesson in emotional intelligence. The hashtag #RespectLikeChuck trended for weeks. People started sharing stories of times they chose peace over pride. A teenager from India wrote, "I was about to fight someone at school today, but then I remembered that Chuck Norris video. I walked away. Felt better than winning a fight." A single mother from Canada posted, "That man didn't just stop a fight. He started a movement." In a world obsessed with dominance, one man reminded millions that the greatest victory is control over yourself. Chuck sat in his living room, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky. His phone buzzed with hundreds of notifications, news articles, interview requests, viral trends. But he ignored them all. He looked at a framed photo on the wall, a younger version of himself in uniform. Decades ago, he smiled faintly. "Same lessons, different times," he murmured. A knock came at the door. It was the biker gang leader, now clean-cut, holding an envelope. "Sir, I wanted to thank you in person," he said. "We donated the money we used to waste on fights to a youth center. In your name." Chuck took the envelope, nodded, and replied softly, "Don't thank me. Thank the man you decided to become." The leader's eyes misted. "You changed us, sir," Chuck smiled. "You changed yourselves." The man turned to leave, but Chuck called out one last time, "Remember, it's not about being the strongest in the room. It's about being the calmest." The leader nodded, tipped his head in respect, and walked away into the fading light. Have you ever seen someone turn their anger into strength, like the bikers did? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what lesson you'd take from Chuck's story. Chuck Norris didn't just teach a gang a lesson. He reminded the world of something timeless. True warriors fight only for peace. Months had passed since that quiet Texas diner turned into the stage for a lesson the world would never forget. The headlines had faded, but the message remained, echoing across classrooms, gyms, police academies, and homes around the world. What started as a moment of humiliation for a few reckless bikers had become a global symbol of discipline, humility, and redemption. Across social media, the movement hadn't died down. It had grown. Videos poured in from every corner of the globe, people standing up for others, stopping fights before they started, and choosing kindness over aggression. A teacher from Kenya posted, My students watched Chuck Norris's diner story today. Now they say we fight like Chuck and with calm. A police officer from Germany wrote, "We're using his story to train recruits in patience and restraint." Even celebrities and influencers joined in, using the hashtag, the Chuck effect, celebrating emotional control as the new form of strength. A news anchor smiled into the camera. Tonight marks 1 year since the viral Chuck Norris diner incident, the moment that reminded millions that true strength is peaceful. The screen behind her showed a collage of stories inspired by that day: bikers helping rebuild a youth center, veterans volunteering, and young martial artists dedicating tournaments to the value of respect. What began as a confrontation, the anchor continued, has now become a worldwide call for kindness. Under a bright summer sky, hundreds of bikers gathered on a long Texas highway, this time not to intimidate, but to inspire. They wore shirts that read, "Respect rides on." The same leader who once mocked Chuck now stood on a small stage, microphone in hand, addressing the crowd. "A year ago, I thought being feared made me strong. But that day, that man showed me the truth. Real men protect, not provoke. We ride now to honor that." Applause broke out. Dozens of people nodded, some wiping away tears. And among the crowd, unnoticed at first, stood a familiar figure wearing a cowboy hat and calm smile: Chuck Norris. When the leader spotted him, his voice faltered for a second. "Mr. Norris, you came." Chuck stepped forward slowly, nodding. Didn't want to miss a ride for the right reason. The crowd erupted in applause. The leader extended his hand and Chuck shook it firmly. No cameras, no dramatics, and just mutual respect. Later, as the sun dipped below the Texas horizon, Chuck stood beside his truck, watching the long line of motorcycles disappear into the distance. The sound of engines echoed softly like a heartbeat. No longer angry, but proud. His friend, the old truck driver from the diner, walked up and said, "You realize what you started, right? This whole movement?" Chuck chuckled softly. "I didn't start it. I just reminded people of something they already knew. They'd just forgotten for a while." He adjusted his hat, his eyes still on the fading road. Sometimes the world doesn't need another hero. It just needs a reminder to stay human. The two men stood in silence, the warm breeze carrying the last rays of sunlight across the highway. And so, what began as an ordinary afternoon, an old man, a diner, a few bikers, became something far greater. A moment that redefined strength for a new generation. Clips rolled across the screen. Kids in martial arts uniforms bowing respectfully. Officers helping the community. Bikers mentoring teens. All carrying the same quiet power. Because real power, the narrator continued, isn't about fists, fame, or fear. It's about heart. A year later, Chuck returned to the same diner. The waitress smiled warmly. "Back for more pie, Mr. Norris?" Chuck grinned. "Best pie in Texas and best memories, too." He took his old seat by the window, sipping coffee as sunlight poured in. On the wall nearby hung a framed photo, a still shot from that day, labeled "Respect Begins Here." Chuck looked at it, smiled faintly, and said under his breath, "Guess peace does pack a punch after all." If you believe the world needs more strength with humility, type respect in the comments. And remember, you don't need to be Chuck Norris to make a difference. You just need to stay calm, stay kind, and stand tall. One man's calm changed a few lives that day, but his lesson changed millions. Because legends don't just fight, they teach the world how not to.